All right, here we are, and we are going to continue on with this unit, and it's another parts chapter. So there's a lot of terminology to be absorbed, um, a little bit more function, so might be a little bit more engaging than the bone chapter specifically. Do use your online course, do look at all the videos that are posted via YouTube on our quote, quote, quote guest lecture series. Strongly suggest again that you access a skeleton that you can use. They're relatively inexpensive. It doesn't have to be, a really high quality, but it will help you a lot as you are working through this as your own self-teacher on this content. Okay, here we go. Share screen, open it up, and there we are, joints. Ta-da! So in this chapter, first we're going to have a general idea of how they work. So there isn't necessarily memorization here, except when we get to this joint category area. These various terms that are used to describe various types of joints often shows up on that MBLEX exam. And then we have information here related to the function and the form and function overlap. And then we have the individual joints, and there is a feature in this area where it's going to actually talk you through palpating the structures of each joint. You need to do that. And this is again where the read to feature helps, or you read a section and then you palpate it, and then you move it. Okay. And then we talk a little bit about how this is going to become integrated into massage therapy in terms of range of motion and how we use various types of joint targeting methods in our massage. So movement and assessing movement is an important part of what we do. And then we have our pathology section. So objectives and our key terms, a little bit bigger list here now. Learning how to learn, and you can learn this stuff by moving yourself. So when we're talking about a particular joint, then you're going to want to move that joint. So in general, there's two places in order for us to move. This is like a hinge on a door. In order for us to do that, there has to be a joining component of the two parts: the door, the wall, and the hinge. And so the understanding of this is we got to understand where the hinge attaches to the door, and we have to understand how the hinge attaches to the wall, and then we have to understand the movement of those two parts together. And so that's more complexity here than in the bone chapter. So some interesting points here. A joint cannot exist with only one bone, because it's where there is a level of movement. Now, some joints for stability have fused, like we see in the skull. Now, there are systems and bodywork styles that say there's still movement there, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but the movement is very, very slight. And I don't know that we can mechanically affect that. But there are many joints that we work with that are very movable. And those are the ones that we want to spend most of our time understanding here. Joints seldom work alone. That they work in units. And as we get through this, you're going to hear terms like open chain and closed chain. And they can't function alone. This is where the muscle joint unit becomes intricately involved. And then and so there's stability, because the joint is where things move, so there's an inherent laxity there. And stability, the stability has to come before the movement, the function. Think back to the door hinge. If it's too wobbly, or if the door is not shaped right or doesn't fit right, then the mobility of it is going to be influenced. Okay, so another term for joint is articulation, and sometimes that will be used, and so you got to kind of, it's common to have multiple names for the same thing. So here I talked a little bit, I already mentioned the balance between joint stability and joint mobility, and stability will come first, and then there will be mobility. And if the joint structure itself cannot provide the stability, then the soft tissues around it will attempt to do that, and that's where we get a lot of our stiffness. And then there's some generalized principles here, like the simplest human joints usually are less mobile and more stable, like the indentations of the skull bones. And the more complex joints usually allow greater mobility and are less stable. And you can think of your shoulder joint. So this box describes some functional language here of stability and mobility. We'll work on this in class, because this is something that is helpful when you get a demonstration involved. But form closure is the form. So if you've got, joints can simply be described as a concavity and a convexity. So if you've got a lot of form there, then stability is provided by the form. But if you don't, then you still have a little bit of a cave and a little bit of a hill here. You still have that generalized form, but it doesn't have the close contact in there, and so there's more movement in the ligamentous structure and the soft tissue around it, the tendons, the joint capsule, and the muscle structure itself needs to provide the stability, and that's a force. So these things can do something, they create a force. There are quite a few studies that indicate that laxity or too much mobility, and there are some connective tissue diseases that actually can show up with this. They're a big cause of a chronic pain, chronic fatigue symptomology, because the muscles have to work so hard to maintain the stability that they use a lot of energy, and they're fatiguing. And so you know, we think about, oh, I need to be more flexible, more flexible, more flexible. Well, you have to have a flexible range. But too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. So we need stability, but too much stability makes us stiff. And we need mobility, but too much mobility is also problematic. And other tissues will try to maintain that stability. So we still get a sense of stiffness. And that in assessment's hard sometimes to determine. Is this person actually stiff because of limitation in movement, or are they actually too loose in their joint structure, which is a little more common, and the stability is coming from other mechanisms. And that's going to interplay with one of our methods that we think of as elongation. We're going to have to make decisions about how much of that is important for daily activities. How do we alter that if we're dealing with a level of performance, like an athlete or a musician or a dancer, or a job-related activity? And what is that going to do over the long term? So here's a picture of that I was just explaining. And here, the bony parts, plus the ligament and other factors around the joint capsule, provide most of the stability. So over here, these things are adjacent to each other, not held together. And that requires more soft tissue to provide the stability. Because of the nature of the bone, the articular cartilage, the ligament structure, the tendinous structures that all are interfacing with each other at the joint area, these are all connective tissue structures. We do have to know more about collagen. You know, you should be doing these activities. And so we have to have an idea of the stretchiness or the give, because these structures have different collagen type tissues, different, not collagen type tissues, but different connective tissue fibers that are involved with them. So we have elastin, which is more stretchy, and we have collagen, which is a little bit more crimpy, and then has a hard stop at it when you get to the end of it. And then how this all forms together around the joint capsule, like a balloon that surrounds where the two bones come together. And cartilage is a real important part of this, and there's a specific type of cartilage in freely movable bone joints, which you're going to learn are synovial joints. And there has to be a lubricant in there, like WD-40-ish type lubricant. And for us, it's synovial joint, which is a hyaluronic acid material. And they actually, in a joint that has become degenerative, where they've lost some cartilage and they've lost some of the ability to secrete the synovial fluid, they'll actually inject a type of fluid in there that will mimic that. That's a way of handling a joint that is beginning to deteriorate. So we're also talking about the stiffness here of connective tissues related to the joint, and there needs to be an inherent elasticity. There has to be an inherent level of pliability, but there's also the importance of some stiffness. And this changes based on movement. So think about when you get up in the morning, how stiff you are, and then you move around, and this starts to loosen up. So sometimes people will say motion is lotion. So then we have to get into this idea of how much give is there in these tissues, and how is that relevant to massage. And of course, here are my birds. So I oftentimes will have you think of a piece of plastic wrap. There's a level of stretch and give on that, but if at some point, if you continue the force application, or if you push into that tissue, sooner or later you're going to reach the end of its ability to adapt, and you'll get some tears. So that's kind of in the plastic range here. So if you get a sprain where a ligament has frayed, you've entered the plastic range there, and it's caused a tissue injury. And laxity is too much, and over time, over an extended period of time, ligamentous type structures can deform and lose their elasticity. So while they can elongate and then kind of come back because of the elastin, over time, if that continues, you get a lengthening of those tissues and less ability to come back, and then the joint is sloppy. So people that have a lot of flexibility, they have this idea of laxity. Sometimes it is inherent, like with some connective tissue issues that people are born with or might develop, or it can be acquired, and that can be on purpose, like an aggressive type of a yoga, an ongoing yoga situation where you get more and more and more aggressive, or a training effect related to like gymnastics. So we're now realizing that connective tissue diseases are more common than we had thought. And you want to make sure that people are screened for that, and that we understand that, because that's going to influence the massage, mostly in how aggressive we elongate tissue. It's often heard of as stretching. So now we're starting to circle into what massage is all about, which is the application of a mechanical force, and how that actually acts on the body. So obviously massage would be an external force. And if somebody is moving or stretching, there's an internal pull. And then the load is how much strain or how much stress is applied. And sooner or later, if there's too much of that, the tissue will break or become injured. And so we have to pay attention to that sweet spot when we're doing massage, that we load the tissue in order to encourage change, but we don't overdo it. Mostly this happens with aggressive forms of pulling tissue, and or aggressive stretching type movements. So we need to have an understanding of this to understand the method we're applying with massage. This activity here is going to give you some things to think about in terms of, how would I use this information in assessment? What if somebody is hypermobile or hypomobile? And what kind of a treatment plan would I want to pull together for that? Also, this language that we've been talking about has been used to describe massage methodology in what's called the entry-level analysis project. And this was, it's a system of language and concepts. So that's what this segment right here is for you. You've got a similar picture, a similar discussion of this in your fundamentals textbook as well. So now we're starting to get the overlap of the sciences and massage application here. So what we do with mechanical force is we can either cause something to move, or we can change the shape of it. And most of what we do with massage is change the shape. But the movement part of it is intricately involved with joint function. So we need to stop and think about how the methods we are using are going to affect what's under our hands or our forearm. So, like I say, this is thoroughly discussed in the fundamentals book, but this is one of the reasons why using a textbook like Essential Science that specifically targets massage therapy is so helpful, because now you're starting to put relevance to what you're studying. So this is going on and discussing the various strains or stresses that occur when tissue is loaded, and massage loads the tissue by applying a push or pull, which is a mechanical force. All right. So we will talk about this and talk about this and talk about this. Now we're getting into the individual joint types. Now we're back into a language and terminology that you need to understand. So notice multiple names: synarthrosis, fibrous joint. You got to know both terms. And then we have amparthrosis or cartilaginous joints. These don't move that much. And then we have diarthrosis or highly movable joints, also called synovial joints. So here's your section summary, your practical application, your focus on professionalism. Okay, now we're going to get into joint movement. And so I am going to stop the video here, and we will start to talk about this in part 2. Okay, I know, it's a little bit more complex. I'm sure your brain is going, but it'll be okay. It will.